Julian Green has been digging into this story. He joins me now with more. What do these experts mean by the worst is yet to come, Julian?
They say cyanide detected so far will pale in comparison to what soon could be coming down the valley. And it's probably too late to do much about it, at least to the degree needed to really protect the environment. These experts, they say a plume or rolling wave, they have different ways of characterizing it, of contaminated groundwater is heading toward Haggart Creek. And that creek, it's nearly 1 kilometer away from the toe of the slide. That's where there's a debris field now, where millions of tons of cyanide-laced material came crashing down weeks ago. The waterway is habitat for fish like Arctic grayling and salmon. I don't need to tell you the shape that salmon are in these days. Their numbers have been plummeting for years. And Haggart Creek then flows into the McQuestion River. From there, the Stewart, and then the Yukon River. Now, Farzad Moham is a chemical engineer and water treatment expert. He says since the slide, pumping capacity at the heap leach facility has been disabled for weeks. He also says storage space for surface water has been extremely limited. He says storage capacity, in fact, has run out, and he told me that around noon on Monday.
Okay, so things could have even changed from then. Let's talk more about the cyanide, Julian. We know it has been detected in Haggart Creek. How do you treat that?
There's an industry term for it, and it's called cyanide destruction. The company has a system in place to do that, but Moham says the key piece of it, and that's hydrogen peroxide, is in very short supply. And that's not the only problem here, Megan. Peroxide can break down cyanide, but it also reacts with it and creates ammonia, which, as you know, is also toxic to plants and animals. So in the end, we're kind of dealing with something of a catch-22, sort of swapping one chemical compound for another.
How much ammonia are you going to end up with? Well, exactly the same amount of cyanide that you had in your water. So you are looking at a very high concentration of ammonia, even if you destroy all of your cyanide. You manage to destroy it, despite all of the odds. If you manage to destroy all of your cyanide, you still have ammonia. There is no plan for ammonia.
Now, the Yukon government ordered Victoria Gold to create a system that could intercept and store the contaminated groundwater. Where are we with that?
Right, you're right about that. The government did make those orders. It asked for a plan to, among other things, intercept and collect groundwater. The Yukon government also wants the plans for expanded monitoring and water treatment efforts. Those plans, I should point out, they're not public, and it's unclear if the government will make them public, but they do exist. A government spokesperson told me as much. Experts say, though, the time it's running out. So I did speak with someone named Bill Slater, and he has more than 30 years of experience working in water management in the territory. He believes the slide eliminated the company's contingency plans and equipment for dealing with something of this magnitude.
Those facilities and equipment are critical. They also lost access to the backup storage pond because the spillway was destroyed. So the pumping capacity was destroyed. The spillway was blocked.
Now, the company did build a couple of dams, and it's also been taking water samples from many different sites, but Slater says it's just not enough. He also says 5% of the cyanide solution was lost in the initial slide, and that the remainder has for weeks been draining into the valley. He says experts haven't been seeing any of that solution at the collection sites, which he says can mean only one thing. It's in the groundwater now. And slowly but surely it's heading toward that creek I mentioned, Haggart Creek. Slater and Moham both say it could reach the creek in 2 to 3 weeks. Though at this point, there's no way to know for sure, and there's another piece to this too.
The design of heap leach facilities is such that they typically do not have adequate storage capacity on site to store all of the leach solution that is in the system. In order to keep that solution in place and avoid its discharge to the valleys around, the pumps must keep running. And that's what happened here. We lost the pumps. And so there never was storage capacity for all of that leach solution. The system wasn't designed to have that storage capacity, and that's typical for heap leach facilities.
Slater says companies see increased storage as just too costly and instead sort of decide to manage the risks in other ways. And this seems important because right now there are proposed projects in the Yukon that include using heap leach facilities. And one, for example, is the proposed casino mine.
So where is Victoria Gold in all of this, Julian?
It's a really good question. For 3 weeks and counting, just to be clear here, no one with Victoria Gold has spoken publicly about the mine failure. We've been calling every day. We do have a few news releases from the company, but those are pretty cursory. There's not a lot of detail included in them. So Cord Hamilton is a civil engineer who's also been hired by the affected First Nation as part of its emergency response team. He says behind the scenes, communication from Victoria Gold has looked like passing of papers, letters in the form of daily reports sent to the Yukon government. He says an emergency should get people into the same room, exchanging views, having dialogue, working together. But he says that's just not happening and hasn't been for too long.
This is like a worst case scenario. And if you are knowledgeable about this type of thing and the project, you know that now you have a semi-trailer loaded with dangerous goods going down a steep hill with no brakes and no steering. There will be inevitable impacts from this disaster, environmental impacts. How significant they will be really depends on how hard we hit this now. And we're already going far too slow. Frustration is that there are things that could be happening today. This is a time for transparency and exchange of information at a high level and collaborating. And that's not happening. This is not the time for laying blame. This is the time for how do we respond.
Okay, so we've heard from the Yukon government through weekly press briefings. And as I mentioned earlier, the Yukon government has also sent out numerous orders to Victoria Gold, including a new one to build 2 additional line water storage facilities. And that is, it appears, in response to the fact that storage has run out.
Okay, so much to keep an eye on, Julian. I know you'll be covering it as we go forward. Thank you for your work on this.
Thanks, Megan.